What exactly do you teach, Mr. Ericson?
I teach robotics, introduction to engineering, architecture, and sometimes they help me fill in for metals and for video production.
Can you share your background on how you got into teaching?
Originally, I went to UW-Platteville because they had two different majors that I was interested in. One was teaching, tech ed specifically, and the other was engineering, and I was kind of waffling between the two, and I decided that teaching was probably the better path as I enjoyed it more, and all the math elements of engineering were not my strong point. So,
what does Ericson mostly push when he teaches?
He really pushes the design, fail, design, fail, design, fail process. He's really prone to convincing students not to give up on project ideas and to push themselves to really try harder to achieve things that they're not quite there yet, because you can get there in the process of trying to design something that you're not quite ready for.
What are some key topics you cover in your class?
One of the main things I like to teach in my classes is problem solving. Not necessarily how to do specific things, but it's a life skill, how to be a problem solver. If you can figure out how to solve your problems, you can usually make your way through any career with the basic training on there. And the other big thing we teach is critical thinking, and they really do go hand in hand, problem solving, critical thinking. But if a student can solve their problems, and they will need to do the critical thinking to solve the problems, then they should be pretty good in life.
How up to date do you think what Ericson teaches is?
I think he's pretty up to date with his teachings. I mean, as far as I can tell, I took his classes for intros, and through my research, I mean, most of what he told me was pretty up to date. I mean, I haven't found anything that he never mentioned to me, or I haven't run into anything that I feel like he failed to teach me.
How do you keep your curriculum up to date and working?
Every year I try to get to a couple different events, conventions, or meetings with tech ed teachers, that kind of stuff, and just get some good takeaway from that, figure out what the new stuff is. This year I did a solar power event where we talked about how to implement renewable energies in your classroom curriculum. Last year I discovered a new website that had free resources for teachers, and they actually sent me a bunch of kits and equipment and stuff like that. So I just try to look around and see what's available and see what we can implement.
What do you think the most important skills a student should develop in your field is?
As I said, problem solving, critical thinking, definitely the two main things that I hope my students come away with.
Whose classes do you think if he had to swap with, who would he swap with?
I think that if he had to swap with somebody, he'd probably do Gutchow. I did intro to engineering with him, and he was very good at teaching those topics. I feel like that he'd have a pretty easy time switching over, because Gutchow just does more advanced classes for engineering, and I think that he could do that pretty easily. It'd just be a bit of an adjustment to have to figure out those harder and more broader topics, but I think he'd do perfectly fine with it.
Can you discuss a project or assignment showcasing the student's creativity and understanding of a subject?
Just recently, my architecture students finished up their first major house plan, which I think went really well. A lot of them were able to take what I taught them and apply it to creating basically a house and all the stuff needed in a house to make it function. And they did, so they have to go through and design where all the rooms are and how they work together, and if the traffic patterns are good and if it looks good and all that stuff. And most of them did a pretty good job with it, and especially for being their first house completely that they've designed, I think they look really good.
How do you encourage collaboration and teamwork among your students?
Group projects and communication projects, For example, in my robotics class currently, we are doing kind of an assembly line project where each group has to build one section of the assembly line and has to make sure that the item gets passed to the next group and that the group can accept it and how it's orientated. And there's just a lot of communication that needs to happen between the groups for it to work out properly. And it's fun to watch the students, how they are both excited about it at first and they get a little frustrated when another group isn't communicating properly. So it really encourages the communication both ways.
What challenges do you see students facing day to day in your classes?
Motivation and asking for help is probably the biggest challenge I see students face, especially after COVID happened. A lot of students were more closed off, not as open to asking for questions, raising their hand, that kind of stuff, which is kind of sad because when you get out into the real world, asking for help is another big thing that'll help you be successful. Admitting that you need help is always a good thing to be able to do, and there's never anything wrong with it. And just knowing to go to someone to say, hey, I need help with this, or I'm not going to be successful, and it'll just help you be a better person.
Do you have any advice for students aspiring to pursue a career in architecture or engineering or robotics?
It's a lot of work, possibly more than you might expect, but in the end, I think it's really worth it. Being able to do or work on a project that has a physical form at the end is really nice and very rewarding. For example, if you're an architect and you design a whole house and then you can pass it off to a builder and the house gets constructed and you can walk through it and hey, I did that, that was my idea. That's just a really good feeling in the end.
How do you assess student progress?
Obviously, we get the assignments at the end of the project and I grade them, but other than that, I like to walk around, talk to students, ask them about their project, what they're doing, see how they're progressing with it, what their ideas are, what problems they've been facing with it, and then I kind of share my thoughts on it too and give them some pointers and tips. And I always tell my architecture students especially, these are just my ideas. They're not necessarily what's right, and you can do it the way that works best for you.